This is Jessica Marra, here with Gary Daniels, Associate Director of the ACLU of Ohio. It's July 12th, 2012, and it is 11 o'clock a.m. All right, let's start the interview. So we'll start with some easy questions like when and where were you born?
When and where? 1970 in Youngstown.
In Youngstown, so you're native Ohioan.
I'm a native Ohioan.
Okay. And what was your family life like where you were growing up?
Family life. I lived the typical Youngstown experience. My father was a steel worker, and then when the steel mills closed down, he lost his job about 1980. He scrambled for a couple years to find a job, ended up with something that was less than satisfactory, but paid bills. My mother was a registered nurse, a visiting nurse, would travel around to the worst parts of Youngstown giving medical care to people. Half brother, half sister, but no, typical, I think, Midwestern industrial experience. We had my father had a good job for a while until they all left Ohio and the United States, and then we scrambled to get by for the remaining years while all the family was still in the house.
And can you talk about your education?
Public school, Boardman High School in Youngstown. Went to Kent State University, got a bachelor's degree in political science, and never really felt the need to be formally educated beyond that.
And what sort of jobs did you have before you came to the ACLU?
ACLU is my first real professional kind of job, starting in, I think it was 1995. Before that, I just held a variety of food service and warehouse jobs. Okay.
And have you always been interested in civil liberties?
You mean like out of the womb?
Yes.
No, I've always been interested in sort of politics, political causes, and however civil liberties intersect with that. I mean, certainly, there's always sort of the ongoing knowledge of right to free speech and those types of things, which I think interest an awful lot of people, but I wouldn't say that my interest was civil liberties specific. But there was certainly some, I don't know, for lack of a better word, entanglement there.
And you were a volunteer for the ACLU?
I started off volunteering, and I lived in Kent at the time with my then girlfriend, and would drive up about 4 days a week from Kent. I was delivering pizzas at the time, and at the time, at a very high volume place, which gave me some financial flexibility for my age. And so I was able, I had no problem driving up to Cleveland basically 4 days a week and doing work up here. And then I got a part-time staff position and then a full-time staff position, and they just can't seem to get rid of me.
And why did you first decide to volunteer with them?
I was waiting for my girlfriend to graduate, and was basically, we didn't know and hadn't really discussed what would happen after she graduated from Kent State, but she had about 2 years left after I had graduated. So we stuck around Kent, and I was living with her, and I was delivering pizzas at night, and I thought, always interested in politics, political causes, advocacy, those types of things, and thought, I could be putting my knowledge and interest in these issues to better use than just delivering pizzas at nighttime. So, like I said, I started coming up here with the ACLU, and it first dawned on me that the ACLU was a possibility, I think, when Karen Leitzel, who's a former board member and who I knew at Kent State, she had done an internship, I think it was, with ACLU, and had talked about it. And I thought, when I was thinking about places where I could potentially volunteer my time, ACLU was right at the top of the list, and that's how I ended up here.
And how did you transition into a position here?
I don't know. They liked it when I was volunteering, like I said, and gave me the part-time position. Liked what I was doing part-time, gave me a full-time position, and I think it was just the path that a lot of people take with organizations and jobs such as these. You start off and give people an idea of what you can do, and then hopefully opportunities open up, and you move up the ladder.
And can you talk about your first roles here? Like, what was your first job here?
Basically, what I did was assist the legal director. Was the person who looked through intake, so all of the people who contact us by mail requesting assistance. It was my job to go through that and pull out the ones that I thought merited extra attention and to talk over with the legal staff. I would do a variety of other things as asked. I mean, it was kind of a utility utility player, but it gradually and then quickly started to shift into doing legal work here. And I'd talk to potential clients. I would do a variety of things, and then after a while, becoming part-time here and then full-time, I've joked with some of the staff over the years. The staff is so big now, but I can literally remember times where intake would come in, I would read it, think it warranted extra attention, tell the legal director this is something I think we should be looking at right away. She would agree. We'd get on the phone with the person. We'd get the facts. By the end of the day, basically what would happen is I would get the letter, I would read it, we would decide to do a press release, I would write the press release, I would send it out to all of the media would call, and then I was handling press calls. So I was doing what is now a lot of different people's jobs. When we were a smaller organization, I would sometimes find myself doing, running the whole course in one day.
And that was another one of my questions is how do you deal with the press? What's your role in terms of that, and what sort of challenges arise from that?
There's several of us senior staff who deal with the press on a daily basis or whenever it comes up. So I have for years been one of the spokespeople for the ACLU of Ohio with regard to our issues. Sometimes it's solicited, they contact us. Sometimes it might be I'm out and about in the community doing something or over at the State House and they approach us. So yeah, that's something I've been doing for a number of years, doing press work with the ACLU.
Okay. Let's talk about your role as litigation coordinator and what exactly that entailed.
Making the legal director's job easier is what it boiled down to. I think, at that time we had one lawyer and me and then some law clerks. So, again, it was going through intake. It was keeping the docket up to date, all of the cases that we're working on, which, also keep in mind I started pre-internet. And I think it's hard to explain to some people what it was like. People younger than me, explaining to them, that we did go to work and have jobs before the internet. It was really a much different world, and I don't know how many people still appreciate that or even remember it. But for instance, trying to keep track of what was going, because we always update the docket for our board members before board meetings, and I used to have to get on the phone to call people, and of course lawyers are very busy people, and I couldn't always reach people, and it'd be very frustrating at some points. And also contacting local legal committees and making them aware of issues going on in their particular area and following up with that. But that was all done by phone, and that's very difficult to do. There's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's no email, and so trying to catch people at just the right time and get them to call you back was oftentimes frustrating, understandably. But as email came about and everything, it made it much easier. And then it got to the point where I could find almost everything that was going on with any of our cases online, on court websites and related ways. And so that all became a lot easier over time to do things that way. But the short answer is my job was basically to make the legal director's job easier. And that was, again, talking to potential clients, recruiting potential clients, doing investigation into cases, maybe doing a little bit of legal research, of the type that I could handle that didn't require a law clerk or a lawyer. Sometimes speaking to the press, writing press releases, going through intake, keeping the legal files in order, all of those sorts of things.
Okay, you left the ACLU for a little while and then came back. Do you want to talk about what you did while you were away from the ACLU? Yeah,
I lived in New York City, and I worked there, and I think like a lot of people, I just needed to get the hell out of Ohio. I was of a certain age, and I lived in Ohio all my life, and New York City was very attractive, as it is for an awful lot of people. And I went there and tried to latch on to doing similar jobs of the type that I was doing in Ohio. And after a little while, worked for a short period of time, several months, at an organization called the Center for Constitutional Rights, where I did legal assistant type work there also, but then also ran what is called its Cuba Travel Project, where we would help defend people who were accused of traveling to Cuba illegally and spending money there, which of course is against federal law. So I helped coordinate that. I really had kind of two positions there, which kept me extremely busy while I was there. soon after, I'd interviewed for that position about the same time I'd interviewed with an organization called the National Coalition Against Censorship. So I was with CCR for several months, and then National Coalition Against Censorship contacted me and said, well, we hired someone else for the position that you interviewed for, but we liked you so much that we've kind of created a position, and we have this in mind if you would like to come on board. And that was to do media work and related things for them. So I ended up leaving CCR to go to NCAC. They're obviously a free speech and anti-censorship organization made up of, it was a few dozen different organizations, including the ACLU. So then I worked for them for a couple years until I ultimately left New York City, came back to Ohio. The idea at that point is I wanted to get out of nonprofit work and advocacy work. There was a lot of financial difficulties then. All of my jobs seemed to go from year to year depending on grants and certain funding and all of that, and it just got rather frustrating. So I moved back here to Ohio to basically, with my then wife, to basically sell antiques, do eBay, go through people's kitchens and attics and garages and basements looking for old things and reselling them, and it worked for a little while.
And then you ended up coming back.
I ended up coming. It was a very seasonal thing at that point. I was doing a lot of work on eBay and out of an antique mall, and around Christmas time and around summertime, things would drop off considerably sales-wise. And there was a part-time position open here to do some online advocacy work, something that I had done. When I was in New York City, I actually worked for National Coalition Against Censorship and then a related umbrella group called the Free Expression Network, where I was actually their only employee, and I ran a website. Constantly updating material with regard to free speech and censorship, and then promoting the coalition members of the Free Expression Network. So I had done similar work. So part-time position opened here, and I contacted Ann and Chris and said, hey, what do I have to do to apply for this job? And Chris said, come meet me for lunch tomorrow. And as it happened, the legal director at that time had left, and I think this was a day or two after he had left. And Chris said, we need somebody in here to make it basically look like we have a legal program while we don't have a lawyer, and we hire a new lawyer, which is a several-month process to get it right. And so myself and then a former staffer who had left recently, Carrie Davis, who was a brand new lawyer, graduated from Case Law School. The two of us basically ran the legal program until another lawyer came on board. And I had had experience doing that, actually. That would have been the third time that I had worked for the organization in between legal directors. So I was used to kind of helping to keep the legal department afloat and looking active while, in fact, there were no lawyers, or there was a brand new lawyer on board who needed to sort of be shown the ropes and everything. And as I think many of us know, sometimes when you come new to the position, you rely heavily on on the junior staffers or whatever to help you learn what's going on and how things are done. So that. When I came back, that turned into the third time that I'd actually done that, and I knew there was no promises, guarantees, or anything that I would be kept on board after a new legal director came, and that was fine. I could go right back to doing my antique, my eBay stuff, all of that, because again at that point I was just looking for something kind of seasonal or limited in time, I never left.
Right. And then you became the associate director.
Right. Yeah, I had started to look in, after I had then started working here again, and I had worked here about 4.5, 5 years the first time around, then moved to New York City. Came back, I started to get interested again in nonprofit advocacy type work. And then, okay, let's give this another try, and thought about taking the next step in my career, and was actually poised to apply for an executive director position with one of the other affiliates, and I let Chris know that, and she gave it some thought, and she said, well, we've been kind of kicking around this idea of opening up a Columbus office, and if that's something that you might be interested in, we can place you down there. And having family in Ohio who was getting older and had certain needs and everything, and kind of wanting to stay in Ohio rather than be in another state, it worked out perfectly. So I was able to stay with the ACLU, stay with the ACLU of Ohio, stay in Ohio, and just move to another city.
Is it different in working in Columbus than working up here? Like, is the community support for the ACLU different down there?
Columbus is kind of an odd place in that, if it was 10 or 15 years ago, I don't think we'd be talking about opening up an ACLU office down there at all. It was, although we had one years and years ago, but Columbus is a kind of, there's still definitely obvious remnants of that, but much more so years ago. It was kind of a conservative, white bread, corporate vanilla type of place, and I don't think that back then people would have been nearly as receptive to the ACLU and the ACLU message, and so opening up that office down there was kind of kept it modest, I think by design, in case, hey, what if this doesn't work out? We don't want to go, full blown down there and then have to shut it all down. So it is different, obviously, down there. It was always kind of difficult to do statewide work when you have a state office in Cleveland and you have parts of the state that are 4 hours away. So having an office in Columbus allows us to stretch our tentacles across Ohio and do a whole lot more. But Cleveland's a different place than Columbus is, and which is different than Cincinnati is, and so there's a lot of similarities, but there are differences too.
Can you sort of take a long view approach and talk about how the ACLU of Ohio has changed over the years that you've been here, in terms of like policies, how you deal with changing public opinions, things like that?
Well, it's changed quite significantly. When I started here, there was only a few staff members. There was myself, Chris, Ann, a lawyer, and then a couple of administrative people, and then a high-level volunteer who did some legislative work. So at any given time, there was only like 5 or 6 of us in the office, and that was it. And you had to do everything. At that time, no internet, no email. Having a fax machine was kind of novel, and we sued a lot. As we were litigation heavy, like the ACLU was nationally and across the country. And that is our national office and our affiliates. And over time, people say this all the time. They say whenever elections come up, if you don't have any other reason to vote, you at least have to vote because of the judges. Because if you get bad judges in there, et cetera, et cetera. Well, people have been saying that to me, I think, every election that I've ever been eligible for, and they're right. So people are still telling me this now, 20 years later, about judges and getting judges appointed and everything, and they're still right. But now we've had 20, 25 years of basically court packing with judges who are not very receptive to what it is that the ACLU is trying to do. And ACLU nationally and here in Ohio have pivoted as a result. Realize that everything we want to accomplish can't be done in a courtroom. And so that means you have to ramp up your public education efforts, your media efforts, your legislative efforts, all of which, and everybody has to be on the same page with all of this. And I think we have always done a pretty good job of that. And then somebody gave a name to it, integrated advocacy. So now that's sort of the buzzword with the type of work that we do. But we've always been doing that, I think, pretty well over the years. But there's always room for improvement with any organization, and I think that's one of the important things with the ACLU of Ohio is under the leadership of Chris and the board, have always recognized that you can't stand pat with what you have. You can always do better. You can always look for new things to do and new ways to do it. And so it's been exciting as new staff has been added over the years to see how that changes the organization. I was rather blown away when I came in here for the first time after I'd moved back from New York City and saw this room filled with staff for a staff meeting. I was like, where the hell did all these people come from? I mean, how do you have a staff this big? This is amazing. And I'd come from working in New York City with a number of national organizations, and I told Chris this right when I came back. I said that didn't have their stuff together nearly as well as the ACLU of Ohio did, whether it was the staff, whether it was the work that was being done, whether it was the website, all of those types of things. So it was very impressive to see coming back how much the organization had grown in a relatively short time and everything that they were tackling.
Let's talk about some specific things that you've worked on. Can you talk about Kent and the May 4th committee?
Yeah, I went to Kent State University, and you can't go to Kent without, although some people do, and it's rather odd. Some people come to Kent and nobody's even told them about, what had happened there, a number of years before. But that was an obvious attraction, being on campus, being politically active. I was very active with the first Gulf War around 1990 there, and protesting that war, and that just sort of kind of dovetailed into becoming active with the Kent State May 4th Task Force. I had friends who were working on that issue. So, and that involved, putting together the yearly vigil and commemoration of the activities, and then whatever would pop up throughout the year, and meeting frequently to discuss these issues. So it was a great outlet for, again, wanting to be active, wanting to do things, wanting to, as a typical college student, wanting to change things and everything. And it was a very important issue. I mean, it was, it was a very odd time in American history, and to have something like that happen, and then, have, hundreds and hundreds of college campuses shut down immediately after the Kent State shootings. I mean, it was a very volatile, interesting time, and was, red meat for young activists wanting to get involved in issues. It's like, here's something big on your campus right there. Again, combined with protesting the first Gulf War.
Have you done anything with the ACLU regarding the Kent State shootings? Because I know they've been involved with that.
No, never had at that time. The commemorations were, the commemorations were always a bigger deal in a year that ended with a 0 or a 5. And so over the years, the only real, and I think what had also sort of turned on the light that the ACLU would be a possibility for me to intern with, volunteer with, something is I had picked up an attorney at the airport in Cleveland. To take him for the commemoration activities. His name is Sandy Rosen. He was living in California at the time I picked him up from the airport, and he had been an attorney with the Kent State shootings, and I think with them trying to build a gym on the site where a student or two were shot, and he had talked about his work with the ACLU on the car ride and everything. So, but there was no specific coordination or anything between the task force and the ACLU at the time, at least to my knowledge.
Okay. Can you talk about, I know you've done a lot of work with censorship, specifically with youth, the T-shirts and everything like that. Can you talk about that, specific cases you worked on?
Oh, yeah. It's I'm sure it's pretty much still the case, but I used to say you could set out a calendar and talk about the type of intake we'll get at any given time of the year. So, certain times of year you're dealing with political yard signs, in the spring and in the fall. Around Christmas time you're dealing with religious intake. September rolls around, you're dealing with a lot of school intake. The policies have changed over the year, or they've decided to enforce them more heavily, whatever the case. So kids are getting in trouble for T-shirts and, whatever the pins that they're wearing to school, or leaflets that they're handing out. And then when the internet became widespread and popular, kids were creating their own crude websites where they would target fellow students or school teachers, administrators, the school itself, what have you. So we've always had a lot of school issues coming in and out of here. And I was also on staff during the Columbine shootings. So I was here, and while there had been school shootings before, nothing of that sort of magnitude and media attention. And for about 6 weeks after Columbine, it was absolutely nuts. Phone was ringing off the hook with parents and students. Literally the day after Columbine, kids were being suspended and expelled for such things as, wearing it was all the strange kids, the strange kids. So it was, if you wear a black trench coat, or you're the goth guy wearing the black lipstick, or you've got a mohawk, or you've, anything that made you different than the traditional Ohio high school student, you were getting suspended and expelled for. And then, the kids with the websites getting suspended and expelled, and just a whole variety, cartoons, kids were writing to each other. I think my favorite was, his name was Carl Bloom, and I can't remember if he was in 2nd or 4th grade, but I think he was in 2nd grade. And just to give you an idea of how sort of nuts the atmosphere was at the time, and it was one of the most nuts times in my whole history here with the ACLU. But he was a young sandy-haired kid, just a second grader, and he had a favorite video game. It involved ninjas, martial arts, something like that. He'd play all the time, I guess. And once you reach a certain high level, it would say you will die with honor, before you move to the next level or after you complete that level or whatever. So at his particular school, and this was in Stowe, or the Stowe area, Stowe-Kent area, they decided to do like a cultural diversity exercise. What are you going to do for second graders to teach them cultural diversity? Well, you have everybody write out a little thing, a little note, and then you stuff it in a fortune cookie. And then you pass the fortune cookies around. Hey, everybody's got fortune cookies, and they read a little, cultural diverse note or whatever. So he writes, you will die with honor. Because he's so nuts about this video game. He writes, you will die with honor, stuffs it in the fortune cookie. The fortune cookies go around. A little girl gets his fortune cookie, cracks it open, sees it, goes to pieces. Oh my God, this is right after Columbine. You will die with honor. So they suspend the kid. For making threats, violence, whatever the fact. They were going to have a school board meeting to further talk about the discipline and everything, and we got involved, sent out a press release, the cameras started showing up and everything. We were poised to go down that night and defend him in front of the school board, and the press was having a field day with it, and they decided to rescind his suspension and not pursue it any further. They made up some ridiculous excuse about how they violated young Carl's due process rights because they gave the discipline paperwork, if I remember correctly, to his parents. And not him. And after all, it's him in trouble. He should have the paperwork. And so we violated his due process rights, and so we're just going to let this drop. Well, of course, that wasn't the case at all. They were thoroughly embarrassed, and once the ACLU got involved, I think they were like, whoops. So that was one instance where we were able to help a kid who was in trouble with the school. But, I mean, the number of T-shirt incidents and school incidents over the year have been absolutely, astounding. Some we've won, some we've lost, but it's been interesting to watch this issue over time, especially as the internet has, found its way into schools and homes and everything. And of course, having a kid who's 15 years old who learns how to build a rudimentary website back when you could just punch in the HTML code and everything and kind of build something, even with some graphics and everything. And of course that's what kids were doing. And they were never, at least when they were coming to us, it was never about non-controversial subjects. It was always oh, I wish my classmate would die, or oh, I hate school, or oh, I hate this particular teacher. And so that's been interesting to see, because it has opened up, the internet that is, has opened up a whole new avenue of First Amendment work, litigation, education, that type of thing. But I can't emphasize how crazy it was immediately after Columbine here. I mean, we were getting just hammered with intake every day, all day, for, in my memory, about 6 weeks.
All right, another cause that I know you've worked on is homeless rights. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some things you've been involved with in that? Yeah.
The ACLU, of course, traditionally has been there for people who have their rights violated and can't do anything to defend themselves. So actually, the very first thing that I worked on, there was the legal director at the time, Kevin O'Neill. My first day in the office was his last day. And he was leaving, and he had this big case that he had been working on involving homeless dumping. So the city of Cleveland had built Tower City and Jacobs Field and the new basketball arena. And like whenever cities build these new shiny objects to try to attract suburbanites downtown, they don't want homeless people around. So, of course, the homeless people there were there, at least some of them were there panhandling and everything, and cities don't like panhandling, and tourists don't like panhandling. So the police had started sweeping panhandlers up out of the downtown area and dropping them off at homeless shelters and soup kitchens. And then when those same people would keep re-arriving at the same locations to panhandle, they started dumping them further and further outside of town, to the extent that they're dropping them off in the metro parks out on the outskirts of Cuyahoga County, telling them not to come back or anything like that. And Kevin had worked this case up for a number of years and filed the lawsuit before I had come on board. But now we were preparing for trial. And so, one of the first things I did was we were allowed through the discovery process of litigation to get access to the Cleveland Police Department, their daily logs. It catalogs, at least in Cleveland, what they're doing at any given time during the day. So you can see, what your police are up to, if you're the commander, the supervisor, or whatever. So our job was to go in, go through all of their documents and see and look for places where the police had come in contact with our clients. Because the thing about working with homeless clients is, lawsuits usually require great attention to detail. And homeless people aren't so great about detail. So when did the police stop you? Well, what you hope to get out of them, was it warm outside or was it cold outside? I mean, do you remember, was it close to Christmas? Was it, day, night, that sort of thing? It's not like they can look in their appointment book and say, oh yeah, this police officer picked me up and dumped me at 6:30 on, November 21st. So it was a way for us to corroborate exactly what our homeless clients were saying. And Kevin was extremely confident that what our homeless clients were telling us was exactly right, because he had gone around and talked to a number of homeless people and advocacy organizations, all of whom knew this was going on. He used to say that this couldn't possibly be a collective hallucination among the homeless in Cleveland, because all of the homeless in Cleveland, it appeared, had either been dumped or they knew fellow homeless people who had been dumped. I mean, this was no secret in the shelters and the soup kitchens and all of that. It was interesting because the police did not want us there, but me and Kevin bought a big portable copier, and we lugged it over to the precinct and started going through their paperwork, and they would say stuff to us, a few times during the days, and we were there for about a week and everything, and then I did things like catalog depositions. So when we were deposing people, what they said, and then putting it into an index that made it easy for the lawyers working on the case. That case ultimately settled the weekend before it was supposed to go to trial. I've always attributed that to perhaps it was cold then. If there's going to be trial, and the city of Cleveland did not want on the plain dealer for several days or a week, talking about people's sympathies with the homeless increase as the weather gets worse. And if the trial would have been going on in July, like in this weather, I don't know that the city would have been so quick to settle. But then, homeless have a variety of other issues, from, the street newspapers, panhandling, which, not all homeless panhandle. There's a distinct difference there many times. But those types of issues have been something that we've worked on the entire time I've been with the ACLU. And this included me being for a while on the board of directors of the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless, both before I moved to New York City and after I came back. And for a while it seemed like they almost had an ACLU slot there, because they were natural clients a lot of times, the people they were advocating for, and helped to have an ACLU person on board.
Okay, let's sort of wrap up with some general ACLU questions. Mm-hmm. Is there often conflict between the Ohio ACLU and the National ACLU? And do you usually side with the Ohio ACLU in that?
Oh, always. I mean, the Ohio ACLU has been a little, and I don't understand why, has kind of been an outlier on a couple of different issues, in particular free speech. We've always been, I think, much more free speech absolutists than some of the other affiliates out there and some of the national office. So when it comes to, so when they talk about enhancing criminal penalties because of hate speech or the way that hate crimes laws are used, we've been more cautious about that from a free speech perspective. I think we've defended clients. I know that there has been some ACLU affiliates who, for whatever reason, have ducked certain clients because they're too controversial, and we've never done that. In my time here, I've helped defend neo-Nazis. I've helped defend the Ku Klux Klan. I've helped defend the Nation of Islam. I've helped defend the Westboro Baptist Church. And that's just on free speech stuff. That's not to say, the sex offenders, the people on death row, the prisoners, name an unpopular client or person out there, and in my time here, we've helped defend them. And I've always been, since the beginning, I've always seen the wisdom of you don't have to like the client, but the overriding issue of should they have a right to free speech. I've never had a problem or an issue with that. I think that's absolutely right on. And so I think some people get a little squirrely or something, when they're asked to talk to the Klansman on the phone or what have you. but that's never been an issue for me. So and again, the ACLU of Ohio, I think, has always been much more absolutist, along with a couple other affiliates traditionally. I mean, Florida was that way for a while. I don't know if they still are. I think Michigan might have been that way and maybe still is, but we were known and had a reputation across the country among ACLUs as being a little bit farther on the spectrum with regard to, again, particularly free speech.
What are you most proud of in your time here? What did you accomplish that you feel most proud of?
Oh, I don't know. It's sometimes whenever you're doing this advocacy type of work, sometimes you don't know if you're having an effect. So if you have when you're doing media work and op-eds and public education type stuff, it's like, are you having an effect? It's not something that's measurable, really. Over time, you can see it's measurable. I mean, ACLU obviously lost a lot of members and support and donations when we defended the Nazis in Skokie. But we made our case. It's unpopular people, but they have a right to free speech, and somebody should be there to defend them capably and in a way that doesn't not only affect their free speech rights, but everybody else that we care about who would be left in the wake. So you never quite know, but you can see now over time, decades since Skokie, I think most people get that. They say, yes, now, back then a lot of people didn't get it. Now, a lot of people that would have before don't flinch when we say, oh, we're defending the Westboro Baptist Church, or, oh, we're defending the sex offenders, or, most people I now think, they might not like it, but I think most people now, they get it. On the legal front, sometimes your victories are very broad, and they're going to help. And then sometimes your legal victories are very specific. You were able to help this one person or this one family, and that's always nice, because I think in this line of work, you're sometimes looking for those victories, that you can hold on to, and it helps, motivate you to keep doing this type of work. So when it's quite clear, you get somebody acquitted, or you get somebody, their suspension reversed or their expulsion reversed or something like that. You can point to those as concrete victories where you're able to help. And now, since most of my work is done in the legislature, doing lobbying down in Columbus, we have had some real effect. We've decided to ramp that up really in the last year and a half or so, and we've had success, I think greater success than we thought we would there, in not necessarily stopping bills outright, but we've been able to make some very bad bills much better because of our involvement, because of our testimony, because of our approaching legislators about that sort of thing. So it's nice to see those victories happen too.
Okay, I guess last thing I wanted to ask you about is we're working on a list of historic cases to be summarized for the website. Do you have any suggestions of cases that important cases that we should take a look at? Well,
I think, if you talk to Chris or Ann, a lot of our cases will probably be the same.
Well, they told me you have a better memory than them, so.
Yeah, that's sometimes I think that's a lot of my value in being here is between me and Chris have obviously been here by far the longest of anybody, and so we kind of make up the institutional memory of the organization. And because I was doing legal staff stuff for so many years, I have a memory of particular legal cases. I don't know if there's any particular. I'm thinking of, like, for instance, because we were talking about Columbine and immediately after Columbine, I don't know if there's any particular case that's so memorable as there's sort of a web of cases all related to Columbine. You've probably heard people mention Yuriko Kawaguchi. The two craziest times by far I've ever worked for the ACLU was right after Columbine and during the Yuriko Kawaguchi situation. That obviously is a big historical case because it's something that's still talked about literally in law schools today. And it's funny, I've had people say, we studied that case in law school. It's like, you're kidding me. This is 15 years ago. 10 years ago, whatever. I think some of our homeless cases, people still look at and contact us about nationwide. The homeless dumping case, Clements versus City of Cleveland that I mentioned. We've had a couple street newspaper cases with the Final Call, Nation of Islam's newspaper, and the Neox homeless newspaper, the Homeless Grapevine up here. In some cases are, I think they're more important because I was working on them an awful lot rather than, they might necessarily be of overall historical importance. But Kawaguchi, Columbine, and some of the homeless cases are definitely some of the big ones. We've been able to do some good things with that, but it's like, sometimes it's also about like picking amongst your children. It's like, no, that was important for this reason, and it's defending, kids who've been strip searched in school, those types of things. And there's probably been cases, since I've moved down to Columbus, that would enter into that kind of historical realm or framework. But the three big areas or cases that I can think of: Kawaguchi, our work after Columbine, and some of the homeless cases that we worked on. Otherwise, we've had plenty of good, big, impactful cases, but they're the types of cases that the ACLU does and will always do. So 10 Commandments on the schoolhouse lawn, 10 Commandments in the courtroom, guy puts up a sign criticizing the police chief in his front yard, and take that down, and they get into a big, brouhaha over that. So it's they're all fun and exciting and interesting in their own way, but it's what you expect the ACLU to work on.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that I didn't hit on?
No, I don't
Anything
think so.
important you did that I missed?
No, I just don't know. I've enjoyed, we've got a great staff here, and I've said this very often to the board and to Chris, and I think the most important thing that this organization has done over the years is it's valued its employees and given them the tools to continue doing their job. So sort of like they know when you need a helping hand, they know when to get out of the way. And they value your work, and they show you value your work. The pay here is good, the atmosphere is good, all of that. So and that has helped us become a much more impactful organization. I've worked with organizations, I've worked for organizations that don't realize that. If that person leaves or whatever, we'll just bring in the next person, we'll do whatever. But because so many of us have been here for a relatively long amount of time, we're able to do stuff much quicker, much easier. We're able to talk to each other in shorthand. We don't have to worry about offending each other. It's like getting on the phone and being like, hey, can you do this? Da, da, da. It's like, whereas if it's somebody you don't quite know, it's like, yeah, I was kind of wondering if maybe we could get together sometime and just sort of, whereas I can get on email or phone with all these people, hey, can you get me this, right away? It's like, and nobody gets offended. Everybody's very busy. Everybody knows what's going on. But, there's a reason Chris has been here so long. There's a reason I came back and have been here for so long. There's a reason Ann has been here so long. And now Mike and Shakira and other people. And it's because we're treated good here. We're treated fairly. We're treated, I think, very well with respect to other nonprofit organizations. And we're given enough room and enough space to develop as employees and activists and everything, and that very much positively affects our work and the organization as a whole. And like I said, I've seen the opposite of that enough times to know that if you value your employees and you keep them on board and make this an attractive place to work, hey, they'll stick around and they'll get much better as employees. So, and that's, Chris gets the bulk of the credit for that, recognizing that. I don't know if that's how intentional that is or how unintentional it is, but it's, again, there's a reason why so many of us have been here for so many years.